guys, how's it going? Today we're going to be talking about planting for winter interest. So planting those types of things that add interest during the winter months. Obviously, this is going to be geared a little bit more toward northern climate gardeners where, we have snow, like right now we have snow floor. Things die back and we have to wait until spring to see them grow again. We don't have a lot of green going on or a lot of interest unless we plan for it. Also, this might be geared a little bit more toward beginner gardeners. It's just some of my favorite varieties in a few key categories of plants. There are a whole lot of them out there, so this is just to get you going. So a few reasons why this is important. If you plant for winter interest, it brightens the whole look out in your garden through the winter months. If you've got brightly colored bark, you've got berries, you've got evergreen, texture and color out there, it really helps you get through those really dreary, overcast, dark days because there's something beautiful for us to still look at. And you can be strategic about it too. You can make sure that, look at all of your windows in your house. What do you see? What is your view? What do you need to add into those spaces that you see the most often, like maybe out a kitchen window? I'm at our kitchen sink a lot, and I like to look out there and think, what could I add here that would improve my view during the winter months? Second reason, it does provide forage and habitat for wildlife, because when you plant for winter interest, you're leaving your plants alone through the winter, whether it be, the berries or the seed heads, that sort of thing. We're not touching the plants until spring, so naturally it's going to provide interest for us and food and habitat for wildlife. And the third thing, if you're leaving your plants alone through the winter because you're wanting to enjoy looking at them, it is a natural protector for the plant because it almost acts like a mulch. It protects the crown of your plant. There's just an extra layer on top that's just, kind of helping them out. So I've broken this up into 6 sections: evergreens, trees, shrubs, perennials, ornamental grasses, and hardscape. Each category except for hardscape, I'll talk about varieties that can handle sun and varieties that can handle shade. So of course our first category has to be evergreens because that's our biggest bang for our buck. When talking about winter interest, it's the most important thing you can add to your garden for that structure, for that color. They actually provide a tremendous amount of bone structure during the season too, and you may not realize it because there are other things distracting you, things that are blooming and stuff, but if you've got a backdrop of evergreen in there, it adds a whole lot to your space. This is also the category out of all of them that I would probably allocate the biggest part of your budget. If you're wanting to add winter interest, evergreens are the slowest growing. So it's like Erin and I, when we plan spaces, we always think like, where can we get the biggest size of this that we can, that we can add into the budget? Let's put that one in because we've just bought ourselves 10, 15 years of time by, purchasing the larger one. And the other categories of plants typically grow a lot faster, so you can get away with planting smaller ones. First type are spruce trees, which there are an enormous amount of spruce trees out there, and they will range different zones. One of my favorites is just the regular Colorado blue spruce. I love that tree. They grow quite big, but they're also a zone 2 through 8. I think that's pretty good for an evergreen that they go all the way up to an 8, but they can thrive in zone 2, which that's really cold. They can grow upwards of 40 to 60 feet tall and 20 feet wide, so you do want to make sure you have a good space for them, but there are other kinds of blue spruce. So this is Picea pungens is the botanical name for this category. There's a Zafiro. We planted one of those up in the south garden this past summer. They grow only 8 feet tall by 6 feet wide, but they have kind of that beautiful blue spruce look in just kind of a miniature form. There's also varieties that stay more narrow. So there's the Iseli Fastigiate, is that how you say that? 10 to 15 feet tall, only 4 feet wide. It has a very beautiful, just conical, tall appearance in the garden, but still gives you that icy blue color. There are weeping varieties, which will vary in size depending on the culture, where you've got them planted. And if you stake them or not, you can stake them more upright and kind of have more of this look, or you can let them kind of do this undulating spreading thing if you want. And there's also a Procumbens Blue spruce, which we planted out in the south garden as well. That one grows about 2 feet tall and 10 feet wide. So it's got that beautiful, like kind of puffy, needle, icy blue color, but it just stays nice and low and can kind of work its way around other things in the flower bed. Another type of spruce that I love are Picea abies or Norway Spruce. We've got several different varieties here in our garden. A couple of my favorites are just the standard Norway, but those also can grow pretty large, 60 feet tall by 30 feet wide. We just added a bunch of large ones into our garden this year, and they vary in shape. Some of them will be very like kind of Christmas tree, like the Christmas tree right behind me. They kind of have that layered look. Some of them will be more dense. Some of them will have more arching, like architectural, graceful sweeping branches with like downward facing needles. It's really interesting to see how they all kind of grow, and they all grow a little bit different. There's also a red-tipped Norway spruce that grows 25 feet tall, 15 feet wide, but it's got bright red new growth in the spring and bright red cones, just really architectural and gorgeous, and they don't burn in our area, which, you know, we get pretty high heat with no protection from it. There's no cloud cover, no humidity, nothing like that, and some pretty strong winds, and those Norways just, they do it. There's Picea omorika, which is a Serbian spruce. I have one called Blue Sky. Gorgeous tree, 10 to 15 feet tall is all it grows, and I think the spread is like 8 to 10 feet wide. But Serbian spruces have bicolor needles, so they're like kind of blue on top and green on the bottom, so they have that bicolor effect, and this one gets like purplish blue cones in the spring, and it holds on to its cones forever. So you get to really enjoy them for a long time. Another interesting one are the white spruce, or Picea Glauca. We have a weeping white spruce, a couple of them in our garden, and they stay very narrow, 4 feet wide typically, and grow about anywhere from 10 to 15 feet tall, and they have a very layered, interesting architecture in the landscape. It's fun to play with those different shapes. Next up are pine trees, which this is another huge category. Tons of different varieties, I mean, ranging from small to large, upright, weeping, growing, you know, a little bit more horizontally. There's sphere-shaped ones. There's just so many. It's really interesting to learn about all the different ones, but a few of my favorites. We've got Pinus leucodermis, which is a Bosnian pine. There are a few that are really neat. There's Indigo Eyes. Oh, you guys, this tree, I think it grows 10 by 8, and it gets really tight blue cones that remain on the tree for quite a long time. And then the tree is just that deep green, and it's just much more dense and much more compact than some other varieties. There's also another Bosnian called Emerald Arrow, which grows 15 feet tall and 8 feet wide. And the way it's structured, it appears like it's a much bigger tree than it actually is, because it's got the same structure as the great big pine trees, just in a smaller form. It gets really bright white bark and really deep green needles. One last Bosnian pine is called Irish Bell, and this one, it stays small, so 8 by 6. I always appreciated when I was down at the garden center trying to help people, you know, pick out specific things for specific areas. Finding smaller evergreens was a little bit, it could be a little bit tricky. So there were a certain few that I always had my eye on and thought, you know, if somebody needs something for a sunny area, you know, this is perfect. Irish Bell just fits in. 8 by 6 is such a small evergreen while still giving you that really beautiful, like larger evergreen shape. Then Pinus parviflora, which is a white pine. We have one out in our south garden called Fukuzumi, which has a really, when it's mature, ours is fairly small, we just planted it this year. It has a very windswept look to it, like it looks almost coastal, and it's got a very white blue coloring in the needles, and they're very soft. That one will grow anywhere from 6 feet to 12 feet tall, and varies in width. Every single one of them is just unique. And another one I love is a Pinus flexilis, a limber pine called Vanderwolf. We've planted several on our property. They're a really beautiful, soft blue pine. They grow roughly 20 to 25 feet tall, 10 to 15 feet wide, and they just add that beautiful, soft, fluffy texture. I don't know how to explain it, but they're just a beautiful tree. And then, of course, we have to talk about Austrian pines. Those are very easy to come by. There are a few different varieties. We have one called Oregon Green out in our landscape, and they are dark green, just beautiful dark green. They grow about 20 feet tall, 15 feet wide, which I kind of consider, when things stay under 20 feet wide, you know, if it's in that 10 to 15 category, I kind of consider a medium-sized evergreen, but they just add bulk and structure to the area. Next category are cedars, which is a beautiful category of plants. They are a little bit hit and miss for us here in our high desert climate. Sometimes they will do it. I mean, you'll see a cedar planted in maybe like a commercial landscape, and it's been planted in such a way or in such a position where it's protected enough and it does really well and it flourishes. And then you might have one that you plant, and a couple years later we get a weird cold snap and it takes the whole tree. So we just never quite know what's going to happen. It's a little bit risky for us, but Aaron and I still try because they're such pretty trees. And if we can one day find a spot where one really loves it, it would be great. So the Atlas cedar, the Cedrus atlantica, they are so pretty. So the straight up and down trunk, and then a very layered icy blue open structure. I can't remember the max size on those. I'm not as up on the cedar sizes because we just naturally don't plant as many of them. But the Cedrus deodora, the deodora cedar, you guys, oh my gosh, this is such a gorgeous tree. They can grow upwards of 50 feet tall and 30 feet wide. I mean, I've never seen one in real life that's that big, but we did plant 3 of them this spring. 2 of them did not survive. 1 of them has, so we'll see what happens over the course of the winter, but they are a wonderful, soft, just kind of a majestic looking tree. Next type is the false cypress or chamaecyparis. If you want beautiful structure and a wonderful smelling tree, this is the category you should plant. So weeping Alaskan cedar is in this category. We've got 1 on our property, like the standard variety. They grow about 20 to 25 feet tall and 12 feet wide. And they're kind of Dr. Seuss-esque in their architecture. They don't just add like bulk to a landscape, they add some huge drama. There's also one called Green Arrow that we've planted out in the south garden, 3 of them. They grow like 40 feet tall and just 4 to 5 feet wide, so very, very narrow growth habit. There's also a strict weeping that grows like 25 feet tall, 6 feet wide. But then you've got smaller ones like your soft serve false cypress, which has a very ferny, gorgeous texture. That one grows 10 by 6, so a little bit smaller statured. Then you've got the fern spray gold Hinoki cypress. This plant, you guys, is so pretty. It's got the yellow coloring on it. It's got that beautiful ferny texture. I love using this one in containers as well as in the landscape. Just a couple more in the evergreen category. We have thuyas or arbovitas. We call them arbovitas in our region. I think proper pronunciation is arborvitae, but there are a few in this category that are awesome. Obviously the North Pole we love. We've planted lots of North Pole arbovitas. They grow 10 to 15 feet tall, 3 to 5 feet wide. So long as they get proper water, they are a gorgeous hedging plant. They grow fast. Ours have just performed beautifully. We're really happy with them. There's also the tater tot arborvita. So we're going from something that's tall and thin down to like this little globe. They grow about 2 to 3 feet tall and maybe 3 to 4 feet wide. And they're just this really soft little ball of evergreen and beautiful to add maybe more toward the front of your flower beds, like maybe 1 step back from your front layer. And they just add a lot of structure, even though they're small. And then you've got a couple of larger ones that I really love. There's Spring Grove, which we've planted several of. Those grow like 20 to 30 feet tall, 10 to 12 feet wide, so still fairly narrow for an evergreen. But there's also the Green Giants, which are a really beautiful one as well. They can grow like 30 to 50 feet tall and like 15 feet wide. A couple of junipers I do have to mention. Junipers do really, really well in our area. Of all evergreens, I would say, if you see anything growing and like native evergreen to our area, it would be a juniper. Wichita Blue is a gorgeous icy blue variety. We planted one out in our landscape. Really want to add more, but they grow 15 feet tall by just 6 feet wide. And then you've got Spartan junipers, which we use a lot for more shaped evergreens. You can really shear them up nicely. They grow like 15 by 6. I've seen them get bigger than that, like much bigger than that. So I think it depends on where you've got them. You'll also find a lot of the evergreen topiaries, like the juniper topiaries that are triple ball or spiral. Oftentimes those are Spartan junipers. The thing I like about junipers so much is that here for us, the center doesn't seem to die out like some of the other evergreens that you will find. They tend to keep a very strong structure and they tend to keep their color throughout. So those are all the evergreens that do well in a sunny location. So minimum of 6 to 8 hours of sun per day. There are a few that will do part sun and some shady areas. I included those, I think, in the shrub category though, because they tend to stay smaller. In my mind, they're more shrubs like boxwoods. Typical size for a boxwood is like 4 to 5 feet tall and wide. There are ones that stay a lot smaller. There are some that grow more upright, like Graham Blandy. I think, does that one get 8 to 10 feet tall? I can't remember, and like 2 to 3 feet wide. So you'll find them that range. There are also yews, so YEW. There are several different varieties of yews. Some that get huge and they'll use them for big hedging. Like in the UK when we were there visiting, we noticed that a lot of their hedging and like a lot of their secret gardens that were kind of walled off were walled off with yews. But there are also yew plants that stay a lot smaller. One of the smaller varieties is the Stonehenge Dark Druid, which I just started experimenting with this last year. It grows 3 to 4 feet tall and 3 feet wide. So a really good one for smaller hedging or just, to tuck into the landscape somewhere. The evergreen category is most definitely the biggest, and there are so many more. I mean, you can poke around. If you go to the IseliNursery.com, I think that's the website. Iseli Nursery has the most beautiful specimen evergreens, and I could spend a ton of time on their website just looking through all of the categories. I mean, I barely touched the surface of what's out there and what might do well in your area. And you can go to your local garden center, somewhere where they carry things like that, the more specialty varieties, and you can learn about some really cool varieties that will add some a unique flavor to your garden space. So the next 4 categories do play an important role in the winter landscape as well. The next one is trees. I've got 5 different ones to talk about. The first one are birch trees. I love birch trees. We have several different varieties on our property, and they seem to be really kind of tolerant of so many different things. I mean, if you've got a really wet spot, they can handle it. If you've got a hot spot, like in our landscape, I mean, we plant them all over the place. We have them that get a little bit more shade, like from the north side of the house, and they flourish. We have them out in the south garden, they flourish. A lot of them are really hardy, like usually down to a zone 3, 4. I'm not sure where they top out there on the zone scale, probably like a 7, 8, I'm guessing. But you can get them in a wide variety of bark colors. The catkins that they produce, or like the little seed heads, are gorgeous. Beautiful fall color. I know this is not a fall interest video, but when you've got the white bark with the bright yellow leaves, oh, so pretty. They also are a good one to plant together in clump form. In fact, you can buy them that way sometimes, where they're in a pot with like 3 or 5 trunks coming out, and they all kind of just like manipulate and grow together into this beautiful shaped tree. A few of my favorite varieties, Royal Frost is one of them. It gets the beautiful white bark, but dark purple leaves. So you can add that color, that purple color, in a larger form, because that tree will get 30 to 40 feet tall, 20 feet wide. So it can become a huge structure piece in the garden. I mean, just imagine that white bark with, you know, a blue evergreen next to it, or a dark green evergreen next to it, and then maybe a red twig dogwood in the vicinity, or a yellow twig dogwood. I mean, you add those textures and colors in together, and like all of a sudden you've just got this beautiful winterscape. Another one of my favorite varieties is Heritage. Grows 40 by 30. Now this one doesn't get the white bark like some of the others, but it's like kind of creams and browns, but it's very peely. Like it gets those great big beautiful peels of bark, which I use in a lot of crafting projects. I don't go out and peel it off the tree, but a lot of times, like if it sheds it on the ground a little bit, I'll go gather some of that up. Beautiful to use in fairy gardens, or like top dressing a plant, a house plant, something like that. But it's just got a beautiful structure. I like this one in clump form in particular. You see like 3 trunks together that have got that peely texture. Love it. Then there's a variety called White Satin that grows 35 by 20, but it gets that silvery white bark, and this variety is resistant to borers. So if you have borers in your area, which we do, that is something to consider, because if you do plant things that are prone to borers, you do have to chemically treat them in order to keep the borers out of your tree. Otherwise it can cause some huge problems. So we're pretty selective about the varieties that we do plant so that we don't have to treat them. So planting a resistant variety is one step in the right direction. Now there are a lot of different smaller type birch plants. Like we have a Tickle Creek white bark birch, which I can't remember where it tops out, like 6 feet tall, maybe a few feet wide, has a very weeping appearance, has silvery brown bark, but just that weeping structure adds a lot. Very finely cut foliage. And then we've got a Magical Globe birch, which got a beautiful white trunk. It's been grafted, this one. Beautiful white trunk, and then the Magical Globe part is the top, and it stays just a nice globe sphere, so it's like a lollipop tree. Next are crab apples. So much beauty from crabapple trees. Few things to consider. Crab apples, most of them, except for spring snow. There might be another variety that's sterile, but spring snow will provide the big white blooms in the spring, but it won't provide any crab apples. So there is a place for that type of tree where you don't want any crab apples falling. But if you look for varieties that have persistent fruit, they hold their fruit until new growth pushes that fruit out. But let me tell you what, you're not going to have a mess with those fruit, because birds will eat it. It will provide winter interest until the birds clean it up. But crabapple trees, they're just, like, of all trees, spring blooms. Beautiful foliage that ranges in reds, bicolor red green, beautiful light green, medium green, dark green, beautiful fall color, and then the beautiful berries. I mean, you just have so much from one plant. The one that the birds like the most for us is the Donald Wyman that we have in the front yard, which is a very established mature tree. I think it's a Donald Wyman. I've done a lot of crabapple research, and that's kind of what I've honed in on. Grows about 30 by 20, beautiful white blooms in the spring. It's just a glorious tree, yellow in the fall, and right now, like, it had beautiful red berries. Birds love that tree, and that's where we put the bird feeders too, so they're probably drawn in by that as well, but it doesn't have a berry left on it right now because the birds like it so much. There's Royal Raindrops, which grows 20 by 15, has beautiful red leaves, red bark, and red berries. Beautiful tree. And there's crab apples. So there's one called Harvest Gold. This is one I don't have personal experience with, but I'm gonna get experience with it. I want to put one of these, at least one of these, in our garden because I love that gold color. I found that I've loved, like in the fall tones, like fall color, I love yellow. I love the yellow twig dogwoods. I love the yellow berries on plants. So it's one I want to add. All three of those though have persistent fruit, and you can go on J.F. Schmidt's website. They've got a ton of different trees, and I think they ship to most of the U.S. But they've got like a whole crabapple worksheet, like a PDF that has all the crabapple varieties, and it shows their growth structure, like with just the branches, because some will grow more horizontal than they do tall. They've got a really cool structure. It'll tell you what size the fruit are, if they're persistent, what they're resistant to, and all sorts of things. And that's another variety that I think is really pretty in clump form. I think most multi-trunk trees are just beautiful. It's where it's at when it comes to huge bulky structure. Instead of just having the single trunk, which is nice too, we've got a lot of those around here, you get such a gorgeous shape underneath that leaf canopy. We've got several that I just love, like right in front of me I can see our golden rain tree. That's just, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trunks. We've got an eastern redbud that has 1, 2, 3 trunks, four trunks. Just amazing trees. Next category are willows. We've got several on our property and several that I love. Now, willows are a little bit tricky because they do like a lot of water, and they will rob water from things that you plant around them, and so you've got to adjust for that. In fact, the weeping willow that's behind me here, where we've got the Hebe statue, I noticed that everything underneath it just kind of struggles a little bit, and I think it's because we need to up the amount of water so that they have more water available to them. It's just something we adjust, and I will do it for the we've got 2 weeping willows because they are such gorgeous trees. They grow 40 feet tall by 60 feet wide. They do require pruning quite often because they grow so darn fast. They are slightly messy, so when you have a huge windstorm, I mean, surprisingly not as messy as some other things, I think, but you'll find little branches on the ground. It's an easy cleanup, but they are golden yellow in the winter time. And then of course that weeping structure, there's nothing quite like it. And then flame willows. So this is more of a shrub type, which we've planted just this last spring, 10 to 15 feet or 15 to 20 feet. 10 to 20 feet tall and wide, somewhere in that range. Huge, huge plant, but fiery orange-red stems. Oh, I'm so excited to have these on our landscape because we can cut these and use them in winter decorating, which, you know, we did in the pots around the greenhouse here. And they just add such bulk and such beautiful color, especially like when you've got a snow floor and then you've got these fiery red branches coming out and the sun shining. Oh, so pretty. And the last willow is a scarlet curls, which we unfortunately do not have on our property right now. We had to take one out because it was kind of dying in sections. It was here when we moved in. It was kind of already on the struggle. So it's one that I want to add back in, but 25 feet tall, 20 feet wide. It's got the most gorgeous, I mean, it's got the yellow winter colors, but it's got the most gorgeous, like, curly stems. I mean, those are the type of stems that we want to buy so that we can put them in our pots. But if we could plant a tree out in our landscape that grows super duper fast, you can get them in multi-trunk and kind of shrub form too. And maybe I should look into that instead of like a bigger tree. Yeah, they're just amazing structure and amazing interest. The last tree in our lineup is the only one in my lineup that can handle more shade, or it has to be planted in the shade here. It's a contorted filbert. So a hazelnut, also called Henry Lauder's walking stick. Is that right? I've heard people call it that. Contorted filbert seems like the easiest name to me. This is more like a large shrub, small tree. 12 feet tall by 10 feet wide. So you've got a lot of width there for the size that it is, and I've seen them in multiple different kind of forms, but this one has it's like a medium brown colored bark, but very curly branches, and even the leaves kind of have a curl to them, which some people love and some people don't love, but it also produces yellow catkins. So when you see these undulating, curling branches with the yellow catkins hanging from them, it's really quite nice, very pretty. On to shrubs. Okay, so for our sun-loving shrubs, hydrangeas, number one on the list because hydrangeas are awesome. So many different varieties. Some people like to leave the blooms to the winter, which provides a lot of winter interest, and some people don't. They like to kind of cut those back and clean them up. That's totally up to you. We leave a lot of ours through the winter time. I think one year I cleaned them up. I don't know, it's just whatever the mood is that year. Right now I can look out and I see some limelight hydrangea standards that have big, beautiful panicle blooms just dried right there on the plant, and it does add a lot of bulk. So limelights are a favorite, quickfires are a favorite, little lime punch have been awesome for us. What is the tidbit? Firelight tidbit, the ones right in the entrance to the south garden have done really well. Firelights have done well for us, pinky winkies. There's a lot of pretty ones, you guys. Now here in our area, we really can only plant paniculata, the panicle hydrangeas, and arborescens, the smooth hydrangeas. So like the Annabelle type, Incredible, the big white blooms. The other ones, macrophyllus, serratas, those just don't take our high pH soil, but paniculatas and arborescens, they handle it. As long as they get enough moisture, they perform and they can handle quite a bit of sun. Next one is the proudberry coralberry, which I always have to talk about this shrub multiple times in a season because it's one of my favorites, you guys. So easy to take care of and it provides so much, and it's a really good size. So they grow like 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. Super easy to tuck in somewhere in the landscape. They just take normal water. I cut them back. Like, it feels wrong because they're a woody shrub, but I cut them all the way back to 12 inches from the ground. I cut out any weak stems and just leave the good ones. And then it just like bursts into growth in the spring and just takes off and gets to its full size every single year and provides a huge load of those pink berries. And I'd maybe consider it like an early winter interest plant because they do eventually, when we hit temperatures, which we're going to this next week, we hit temperatures close to 0, the berries do start to brown a little bit, but they provide months and months of beautiful pink berry show in the garden. Black cat pussy willow is another great one. So right now we have one on the end of our west side walkway. They grow like 8 to 10 feet tall and wide, so a sizable shrub. They do like quite a lot of water. If you've got a boggy area, great one for that, but ours is doing pretty well, just getting normal irrigation like everything else. They provide those beautiful black furry catkins. Right now I can see the buds are starting to swell. If I cut some of those branches right now and brought them in and put them in water, they would probably bloom and look absolutely gorgeous. But I've been using those branches because that plant grows so fast. I've been using them for all sorts of support structures, like around amaryllis. It's been wonderful because they're so flexible and long. So really good for projects like that, but really pretty winter interest, more toward the latter part of winter. Viburnums are always a fun choice. Brandywine is an awesome one. And typically, like, brandywines get the pink and blue berries in clusters, like both colors of berry, and they last for quite a long time into the season. I've got one variety of viburnum that I don't know what it is. It was here when we moved in, but it keeps its leaves all winter long. So there are some varieties that will do that. Even here, like, we are a zone 6, formerly a zone 5, so that plant has lived through some like crazy negative temperatures here. Well, for us, it was in the negative teens like 5 years ago, and it just, you know, came through just fine. But viburnums are another one of those, kind of like a crabapple, that provide the beautiful blooms in the spring. Beautiful, a lot of time, like a lot of different types of leaves. There's some really glossy ones, some like heavily ribbed leathery ones. Yeah, they're a medium green, dark green, all kinds of different things. And then beautiful fall color, usually bright red, and then the berries that hold through a lot of the winter. Euonymus are another good one, which is an evergreen shrub. So lots of different varieties there. Trying to think right off the top of my head, there's a Manhattan that's a gorgeous glossy green. I had one in a container that survived a lot of years. There's Gold Splash, so a golden green variegation. There's a lot of white and green variegations, and they will range in leaf structure and size. So some of the leaves will be nice and broad and some will be a lot smaller. Some grow more upright, like a more upright shrub, and some will grow more horizontally. I've seen people train euonymus as like a vine too, up a trellis. Really neat to see. That plant is a really versatile one because you can use it on all those different applications. Oregon grape is another great one. So they've got holly-shaped leaves, green and glossy in the summertime. They get like this deep burgundy fall color, which kind of maintains through the wintertime. And they've got big clusters of blueberries, which are come after their clusters of bright yellow spring blooms. It's a really, really beautiful plant. And that one's available in different sizes. So smaller ones, larger ones. Most of these categories do have a lot of different choices just within their own variety. Pyracantha is another one. So beautiful bright orange berries. I don't know if you guys have seen those. Now they are full of thorns. So that's something to consider. If you don't want to have thorns, it's probably not a good choice to plant. But pyracanthas are just, I actually have 2 in containers behind the greenhouse that I meant to plant out and I didn't. So we'll do that this next spring. But I just kind of want to plant them in a position where I can let them go because I want that bright color in the wintertime. I also want them for cutting for projects. For your more shady areas or part shade areas, we already talked about boxwoods a little bit. Several varieties we have planted here on our property. We have green velvets around the Hartley. We've got a lot of sprinters, a lot of winter gems. North Stars do wonderfully. What other varieties? There's Mount Brunos, which stay a lot smaller. My parents have a lot of those in their garden. They stay like 18 inches tall and wide in more of a globe shape without having to constantly prune on them. There's a vast array of varieties. Green Mountain, we have a lot of those. They're kind of more conically shaped, so they're easy to keep in that form. Grand Blandies, which grow tall and narrow. Huge category. Another shrub that's surprising that will do shade, it's probably one of the most tolerant, like deciduous shrubs for shade, is the dogwood. Now, dogwoods will bloom and they will produce little berries. They don't as well when you have them in a shady location, but they are surprisingly shade tolerant. So like when we were planting at a friend's house this last year, we planted a serviceberry tree, just kind of a baby tree. So I decided to plant Arctic Fire dogwoods, which have gorgeous bright red stems in the wintertime, kind of around the base of the tree, knowing that it can handle full sun right now when the tree is a baby, but it can also handle shade once that tree is forming its leaf canopy and shading that area. So it's one of those plants like boxwoods that you plant them and they can just adapt to whatever you have around them, which is amazing. For us, holly plants are a little bit kind of like the cedars. Sometimes they do it, sometimes they don't. I don't think they love our high pH, but occasionally you'll have one that takes and does really well. There's, castle wall, castle spire hollies. Oh, and I forgot to mention winterberry hollies, which like more sun. They don't do super well in our area, again, because of our high pH, but if you have more neutral to acidic soil, winterberry hollies like berry poppins, and there's berry heavy gold, berry heavy red, I think. There's some gorgeous, I've tried them a couple of times and just haven't found that sweet spot. But if you can get them going, they're absolutely gorgeous in the wintertime. Okay, last one for the shrub category. This is like a part shade to shade plant, is the witch hazel. So witch hazel will provide blooms for you during the winter, like the late winter months. They go into winter, just with branches and swollen. You can see the swollen buds on the branches. And then usually it's sometime in January, end of January, you start seeing them burst open. And Arnold's Promise is a beautiful variety. I have one right behind the chicken coop that I can see from here. Bright yellow blooms. And then there's Helena and Diane, Helena is like a coral, orange, red, pinkish color bloom, really pretty. And Diane has got more of a red bloom. There are other varieties in that. Those are the three I'm familiar with. But here in our area, we do have to provide them with a little protection from the afternoon sun. And they're fairly slow growing, which is kind of nice in a way, but their fall color is phenomenal and their blooms are amazing. Next, we have perennials. This one I'm going to run through pretty quickly because a lot of these are fairly common. I'll just list some of my favorite varieties. So the perennials are types of plants that will come back year after year, but they're most of the time we cut them back and they flush back fresh. So some of my favorites that hold up to our winters here in the sun category, number one would be sedum. Amazingly tough plants. They can take drought, they can take full sun, crummy soil. In fact, they don't want to be fertilized, and their stems usually are stiff enough to hold up to winter snow, a good amount of winter snow. I mean, if you get feet and feet of snow, you won't even see the plant. But right now when we had, I think about 8 inches cumulatively by the end of last week, and you could still see those sedum heads above the snow, holding snow up like little puffs, like little snowballs. A few of my favorite varieties, tiramisu is a fairly new one, but I love it. I love the color. I love the color of the leaves. They're kind of like a coral purple, and the leaves are the blooms rather are kind of that smoky mauve. And then coral jade is another beautiful one that has coral colored blooms that stays smaller. I love autumn joy. I mean, I know that's super common. You can find it everywhere, and it's one that wants to tend to flop if it gets too much water, any fertilizer, or if it just needs to be divided, it'll kind of flop over, kind of needs support. But the most beautiful pink blooms. I love lemon jade, which is a yellow blooming sedum. You can find all kinds of sedum. It doesn't have to even be like the upright. The lower growing sedums are beautiful. They get covered up a lot quicker though than your upright ones, of course. Next, there's echinacea and rudbeckia, and I kind of group those together because they like the same things in our garden and they kind of act the same way, and I treat them the same way. So full sun perennials, They both provide beautiful color through midsummer through the end of the season, and we typically don't deadhead ours. We just let the old seed heads sit there because they look so pretty in the wintertime. They have really strong stems, and Echinacea have bigger seed heads than Rudbeckia do, but they're equally as gorgeous with a dusting of snow. Next one is Clematis, which might not be something you think of as winter interest, but there's the Stand By Me and Stand By Me lavender varieties that create the most beautiful, like whirling little white puffballs when they're done blooming. I think they're just so pretty, and they grow tall enough to where they're above snow if we get it, but they are really beautiful if you plant them up. Like we've got some in front of an arborvitae hedge, and you've got the white puffball seed head and then the dark green arborvitae. Beautiful contrast. Next are Gaillardia and Pincushion Flower, which I also kind of grouped together. They both have beautiful seed heads. They're a little bit smaller, not smaller stature than Echinacea and Rudbeckia, but they can be. They range, but Gaillardia create these little round puffball seed heads that are just so cute. And then the Pincushion Flower, depending on what variety you have, like so the Fama White and Fama Blue, they are perennial varieties that I've been growing out in the cut flower garden. They create the most gorgeous seed heads. I actually, like in the middle of summer, favor cutting the seed heads over cutting, and the flowers are beautiful, but I almost favor the seed heads over the flowers, and they maintain those through the winter time. And then they will drop and kind of reseed in the area where you had them, which is great. I'm loving that, but they don't take over. It doesn't seem like they take over. They haven't for us anyway. Last one in the sun category, I should have probably put this right after sedum, is yarrow. Yarrow looks very similar to sedum in the wintertime because both of them have the type of blooms that kind of like come up and then are in a V shape. Does that make sense? So like the blooms are up top. Yarrow have the very stiff stems, and they're really pretty dried accent and flower arrangements, and they look great out in the landscape. A few of my favorite varieties are Firefly Peach Sky, probably my favorite one. And then there's pink, is it Pink Diamonds? It's a pink one. We have some by some David Austin roses here, and we've got some out in the south garden, and it just adds so much color, and they're so darn tough. Oh, there's the Firefly Sunshine too, the bright yellow one. That adds bright pop in the summer and beauty in the winter. Now a few shade-loving perennials. Of course, we have to talk about hellebores because hellebores are evergreen. They're typically in the zone 5 through 9 category. They will be more consistently evergreen for those of you on the upper end of that zone range. When you get down into the zone 5, 6, by the end of winter, they can look a little tired, so we need to cut those old leaves off, and then they'll push to fresh ones, but they do maintain through the winter. They add something to your flower bed, and they start blooming super early. And there's a lot of different varieties now that face upward rather than facing down. However, I love them all. I like the subtlety of the type that hang down. There's something like magical and fairy-esque about them, and it's something a little bit more unique than everything that has to, face upward and provide that sort of structure. I don't know, I like them all. There's Heuchera, which again, on the upper end of their zone range, which I think they might be also a zone 5 through 9, that sounds right to me, or maybe a zone 4 through 9. On the upper end, they're more consistently evergreen. On the lower end, we struggle with them coming through as evergreens, but they look good for most of the winter time. There are a few varieties that have done better for us. The spearmint variety, the appletini variety, there's Peachberry Ice. Just remembered, Peachberry Ice and the Silver Gumdrop. Those have been pretty good varieties for us here, but they're a really beautiful one to use like in window boxes and containers that will provide that color for you through the winter time. There's also Astilbe, which Astilbe is one of those plants for us that if you don't give it a lot of water, like every day, it's gonna crisp up and die on you very quickly. But if you've got a shady spot that gets consistent moisture, Astilbe are wonderful. They produce beautiful color through the summertime on these stalks. So they've got their leaf canopy, and then they send up stalks full of blooms, and they're usually fairly broad blooms, and then you just leave them. Don't cut them back, and they just kind of dry right there and provide a beautiful winter interest. And the last one is Virginia, also called pig squeak is the common name, but they produce these huge, broad, thick, glossy green leaves. They're not an enormous perennial. I mean, they stay fairly small. We have one called, is it Miss Piggy? But it only grows like, I want to say 10 inches tall or so, but it provides a beautiful mound of that dark green color, and they do last through the winter time beautifully, and then they produce huge panicle pink blooms in the spring. Okay, fifth category are ornamental grasses. Now these can add so much to your landscape. You do want to take a couple things into consideration. The smaller grasses that I mentioned really look beautiful with a light dusting of snow. Of course, the shorter they are, the quicker they're going to get covered up with snow if you get a lot. So you might want to consider in some areas, if you want that texture but you get a lot of snow, pick something a little taller. But the grasses that get real tall, a lot of times they can't handle a lot of snow load and they will just flop over and create a huge mess. So you kind of want to stick in that mid-range, mid to small, or those grasses that you know can handle it. We've left our, so panicum is the first one, first category, I guess, in our ornamental grass section. We planted totem pole, which grows 6 to 8 feet tall and just 2 feet wide. Super strong grass, super architecturally like sound. I don't know, there's something about it. You look at that grass and you're like, that's not going anywhere. And it doesn't. It's held up the last 3 years. We've had it in our winter garden as a huge grass accent, which is great. However, I have a Miscanthus cabaret, many of you know this, that I forget to stake up almost every single year, and it falls down just on its own, not even with snow. So that type of grass you typically want to cut back early so that you don't have the huge mess underneath the snow waiting for you. But panicums, there's also Apache Rose, Cheyenne Sky, that will add that really fluffy, beautiful texture to your landscape. Pennisetum is another great one. There's a lot of different varieties in this category. Some are annual, like the purple fountain grass or the skyrocket, which still add pretty texture. Even if it's an annual, you can leave it up through the winter time and then just take it out and plant something new in the spring. But there's Desert Plains Pennisetum. I want to say it grows 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, and they just produce the biggest, most fluffy, beautiful seed heads that stay upward or upright in the snow. There's Blonde Ambition Blue Grama grass. Grama is Grama, and I can't even remember the botanical name off it, but Betulia, something like that. Anyway, this is becoming one of my favorite grasses. It grows just over 2 feet in our landscape, maybe a little bit taller than that, but the little seed heads look like little praying mantis. They're so cool. The grass itself has got kind of a fine texture, and then in the fall they kind of like brown up a little bit and kind of get that, I guess, dead grass appearance. They just get that wheat colored appearance, we'll call it that. It looks like wheat. But the seed heads are just absolutely gorgeous, and the plant does really well for us here. Full sun, drought tolerant, super tough grass. There's also northern sea oats, which if you haven't, is it Chasmanthia? Chasmanthia? Yeah, Chasmanthium latifolium, or Chasmanthium latifolium. I can't believe I remembered that. Oh, I used to know these names so well when I worked down at the garden center. Anyway, this grass, amazing. So it grows up about 3 feet, and then it creates these arching stems with these little oat seed heads. They're so pretty. They're pretty to use in arrangements. They are, but I would rather just leave them out in the landscape. I prefer grass seed heads out in the landscape more than I do in arrangements, but this grass is so pretty. Now this one would want to flop a little bit, I think, in heavy snow loads. You could tie it up a little bit if you wanted to do that. Or, you know, I have in past years, now this kind of takes away from your winter interest, but if you tie the whole clump in a, in a bunch with some twine and then cut it off at the ground level, you can take that whole grass bundle and put it in a pot, or put it, like use it still for wintertime accent, but maybe relocate it to a more protected area. For shade grasses, there are a couple of different really good ones. Any variety of carex, they have thicker blades. They're very strong. They're not huge. I mean, they'll grow like this tall. What is that, 18 inches? There are probably varieties that get bigger than that, but like most of the varieties of carex I've grown grow about this tall and about this big around, with just this gorgeous kind of stiff structure to them. And lots of different variegations. So there's all green, there's green and yellow variegation, green and white variegation. There's also some varieties that are like red rooster, that grow a little taller and a little bit more narrow, but have a red curly appearance to them. There's also Hakanakloa, or Japanese forest grass. There's the Areola variety, there's the all gold variety. It doesn't really matter for winter interest which one you choose, because they all take on that wheat appearance, that wheat color, but they're a very graceful looking grass. They do get covered up with snow eventually here, and they're not as strong as a carex. Carex will hold up to a lot more weight than the Hakanakloa, but it's a very beautiful one for a lot of our season here anyway. Okay, so those are the 5 categories of plants I wanted to run through. Our 6th category is hardscape. This is a huge contributor to winter interest, at least in our garden. And I'm talking like even stuff that we don't have in our garden. If you've got boulders worked in, if you've got benches, you've got concrete, arbors, obelisks, trellis, anything like that, fences, like even little picket fences, all of those things contribute to the overall appearance of your garden. So there are some areas where I look out a window and I can see a statue that looks gorgeous. And a lot of people will cover their concrete statuary in the wintertime. We did cover our front fountain, but I enjoy so much looking out and seeing it, you know, dusted with snow and in the winter landscape, that I would rather take maybe a year or two off of the life of that piece and replace it eventually than cover it for 4 months out of our year. And that's how long we would probably have to cover all of our concrete. It just adds to the enjoyment, to my enjoyment of the garden space so much that I prefer to leave a lot of things out. Containers, you know, full of branches and greens and things like that are always really beautiful to look at. So consider that it doesn't have to be something planted in the ground necessarily. Maybe you have somewhere that you can't, like you want to block something or a view of something, like maybe a pedestal, cable pedestal or something like that, but you can't plant anything nearby it for some reason. I mean, stick something out there, a pot with some greens in it, and then you know, all of a sudden you don't see the pedestal, but you see the pretty pot. So all of those things will add to the winterscape. I mean, I'm looking outside the greenhouse, I can see the little stone stacked wall. Things like that add a lot. And they're not really, like, that isn't a huge impact for the garden, like a big statue, but every little bit helps. All right, guys, so that's what I have for my 6 categories of winter interest. Now I want to share some interesting pictures that some of you guys submitted. We recently asked you to submit pictures of your garden with winter interest. We had an issue with our link and it kind of messed everything up, and we didn't, anyway. We ended up with a few wonderful submissions that we wanted to share with you. We're not going to put together a full video for that specific category, so we will ask you for submissions of something different here very soon. But let me show you these pictures because they're awesome. This is from Wanda in Ohio. So this is a picture of a bald cypress. So you can see it here without snow. Next to this is like a little barn. It's so cute. Now look at it with snow. Isn't that amazing? And Wanda said that she knows that Erin loves the bald cypress. We planted 3. I don't know if this is a Shawnee Brave, but she said it's about 50 to 60 feet tall. The needles turn a beautiful burnt orange and then fall off. And then it provides this amazing structure. I cannot wait for ours to hopefully look like this. That's amazing. Oh, and there's some pictures of it in fall color. Look at that. Really pretty with the color of blue on the structure next to it. Those are like opposites on the color wheel. Next is from Maria Fox in Utah. Oh my word. This is like is this a raised bed garden here? We've got arbors and pots and fence and obelisk. I just talked to you guys about how Hardscape can add so much to your winter landscape. This is proving it right there. You can see the ornamental grasses though. You can see the evergreens in the background. Oh, she said that they have severe drought and alkaline soil, but she loves evergreens and conifers and the structure they provide, and you've just done a beautiful job with your garden. That is gorgeous. Next is from Tina in Ontario, Canada. Oh my, my, my. I think this is what Erin is going for on our property with the evergreens we just put in. Look at that. That lane lined with evergreens, and then the backdrop with the deciduous trees and the evergreens in front, and then just a simple lamp post right there with the snow. And then a perennial. Look at that. See that perennial right there? That's echinacea with snow on top. It just adds something. It adds some texture out there when everything else looks like a blanket of white. Tina said that one year she even decorated some of the limbs with glitter stars and red balls just for some whimsy. I bet that was really fun. Oh, we should do some Christmas decorations in our trees. Like some big ornaments so you can see them during the day. Next is from Lori Whitwinyard in Pennsylvania. Oh, and you can see the house right there, the house and the garage. You can see all the trees and evergreen. And you see that stone wall up front. See how much that adds? That adds a huge amount of structure. So again, kind of in that hardscape space, you can see by adding those little touches, well, that's a big touch, that's a big wall. But adding that creates a huge distinction to that space. Then from Dawn in Wisconsin, oh my, okay, so there's a prairie in the summertime. So they put in an 8-acre prairie around our home, which is interest all year round, including winter. Oh my goodness gracious. Look at all of these pictures. Look at that prairie in the backdrop there. You can see the trees kind of popping up in there, but all of that forage and habitat right there. Can you imagine? The wildlife probably loves you. Wow. Oh, and a greenhouse lit up at night with a Christmas tree inside. That's winter interest to the max. I love it. Thank you all for submitting pictures, and to all the rest of you guys, thank you for submitting pictures, and to all of you who tried and couldn't, I'm really sorry. We haven't had issues with the link like we did with this last time, and hopefully the next time we get ready to do one, we don't have those issues so that we can put together a full video. Anyway, Thank you very much. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. Just get you started on some varieties that I really love, that have performed really well for me. And you know, the sky's the limit. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.